Cemetery. We want to thank all of our participants, all of our speakers and presenters. We're super excited. Just a note for everybody before I hand this over to Sarah. We currently have everyone's mics muted, and we ask that you keep your microphone muted and your camera off unless you're one of our presenters. If you have any questions and want to know anything, you can just drop it in the chat. And when we're ready for Q&A, we will make a point to circle back.
All right, welcome everyone to our event. My name is Sarah Denham, and I am the president of the Metro Atlanta Chapter of the Women's National Book Association. We are so excited to have everyone here, especially our friends over at Oakland Cemetery here in Atlanta. We are very excited to have this event with them where we will hear stories from the residents of Oakland Cemetery, as well as some historical connections. Just a little thing with our organization. We are a part of a national network that's been around since 1917. So we've been around longer than the women's right to vote in the United States, as we like to say. But we are open to anyone in the Metro Atlanta area, as well as being able to connect anybody from around the United States to chapters near you. If you check the chat, there is a link to take you to our Facebook group, as well as see the amazing events that we are going to have coming up, including we are currently accepting submissions for our Book-O-Ween parade, which involves people dressing up as their favorite book characters or authors or anyone like that and submitting a small video for our parade. Our upcoming women's suffrage theme, election theme book club that is happening on November 1st, and our January book club that will be kicking off the 2021 year. As of right now, all of these are virtual, so you can join from anywhere. So, well, now it's time. I'm going to turn this over to our first speaker, our first host of this evening, Rudy Turner of the Historic Oakland Foundation, correct? I'm sorry if I messed that up. And just remember, keep your mics off, keep your cameras off unless you're one of our speakers, and enjoy.
All right, good evening. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It is an honor to be able to partner with the NWA for this event. We were really excited because it kind of gave us this opportunity to connect all of the pieces of what we love and the stories we like to share, and also hopefully share Oakland with some folks who had never heard of us before. Or haven't ever had a chance to experience capturing the spirit of Oakland before. But I am so thrilled to be here, and I will go ahead and say, just to get it out of the way, I've done a lot of virtual speaking, but it never fails to be a little difficult to speak to a quiet room, right? So I usually feed back from people's energy, so I'm just gonna pretend everyone's out there just enjoying what I'm saying. If you have questions about the topics of discussion as we go throughout this evening, feel free to share in the chat. Love to answer questions, and if we don't know the answer, we know somebody who does, and we love curious minds at Oakland. A little bit of background about myself and the history of the foundation. So my name is Rudy Turner, and I am the private events coordinator at Oakland Cemetery, which is a very unique job. Even still to this day, my dad doesn't quite understand what I do, but what I do is help people come and really embrace Oakland for its secondary, sometimes even maybe primary purpose, but it is it being a gathering place and a public park and a place for people to come together and enjoy the beauty of the cemetery. And it's a very interesting thing. We have a wide range of private events. A lot of times we like to say that we have more weddings than funerals. which is in most years very true. So if you're not familiar with Oakland Cemetery, there's a little bit of a backdrop behind me. You may be able to see just a little, but it's a beautiful place. It's located right near downtown Atlanta, over on between Memorial Drive and DeKalb Avenue, which those are both historic streets in Atlanta. They've been there since essentially when the city first began. So the city of Atlanta started out as just a milepost driven into the ground to be a terminus for the railroad. So they would meet there, and the city kind of sprung up around it. And it had a really kind of slow start, and it had a very industrial start to it. And then actually, in general, Atlanta has a very interesting history. It's not quite the genteel antebellum ideas that you hear sometimes in fiction, but I think a lot of our residents come from that era, from essentially the turn of the century into about the mid 20th century. But Oakland was originally built in 1850, and it was built in order to address the growing amount of population. There was a population boom. There was 2,800 people living in the area that was incorporated to be Atlanta. And so they decided that there was originally a cemetery downtown, kind of near that Five Points area, that like Peachtree and Baker Street. And they thought, well, we need to move this way out into the country to its current location. And it's funny to say that now because if you've ever visited Oakland, the downtown is right there. We're very, very close to the heart of downtown, and we have a beautiful view there of it. But the city kind of grew up around Oakland, but the railroad that actually runs on the backside of the cemetery has been there prior to the cemetery. But the land was originally purchased from a farm, a part of farmland. The parcel was originally 6 acres. And then that expanded to our present day size somewhere in the mid 1890s. I always get that date wrong. But it expanded and to 48 acres. And we have somewhere just shy, I believe, as 73,000 residents. So we refer to the people who are interred at Oakland as residents. I very casually say that term, but I realize it's a little bit interesting sometimes. So if I say resident, you know I'm talking about all of the wonderful souls and lives and experiences of the people who are made Oakland their forever home. And as I mentioned, that the city started to grow and become have a little bit more prominence, and so they initially it opened its gates just as City Cemetery. The term Oakland didn't actually come along until a little bit later. I think around the time of that expansion. But a really interesting fact about Oakland is that we are, unlike most other cemeteries, which tend to be kind of what you see where it's like a big flat space where you have the low markers or maybe individual markers, but that land set aside, you have what Oakland is it's either you can refer to it as a garden cemetery or a rural garden cemetery, but it was a movement to essentially establish a place to destigmatize death, because Victorians, if you've ever maybe done a little bit of research or looking around, you realize that they had a really different relationship with death than a lot of other eras. And that really informed the way that they built the cemetery and the way that the cemetery formed. So they wanted to essentially take away the idea of the spooky old graveyard and build a place that represented the peaceful slumber of the eternal slumber of death. So that symbolism is really common, and that term cemetery also comes from that. All of these things are kind of trying to almost make it a more of a place for the living, is how I like to think about it. So as the cemetery expanded, the Oakland was sold in lots. So a family would purchase a square area where you could build either a mausoleum or perhaps you could bury, I think, up to 12 family members in that space. And all of that land sold out by the 1890s. So we still have active burials, but they're fewer and fewer as time goes on. And it's an interesting kind of factor that, it sold out. All of this land was already sold, but the lots are essentially inherited down through the generations. And that's because with that rural garden cemetery movement, families would come and tend to and care for their own family lots. So one of the interesting features of Oakland specifically, and of a lot of other of these types of cemeteries, Mount Auburn is a really good example of another style of cemetery similar to our own. And you can see it a little bit behind me, where you see that it's terraced. As you guys may know, Atlanta is essentially in the Piedmont. It's the foothills. And so you have a kind of uneven terrain, these gentle rolling hills. So, there's a high point and kind of low point of the cemetery. So they address that with this terracing. And if you go through Oakland, you'll see, it's a little less easy to illustrate, but you see essentially that there's a lot of uniqueness in each of these lots, because each family lot, essentially it's their private property. So they are free to, with some oversight from the sexton and the urban design commission these days, but essentially similar type boards back in the day, they would be able to erect monuments for their family, plant their own plants and gardens and benches and picnic tables, however they really wanted to cultivate that ground to, in a way to honor their lost loved ones. A fun fact, and probably like my favorite fun fact, is that Oakland is technically it's the first park in Atlanta. It was the first public park. And there wasn't actually a lot of public parks in that era in general. Public works as a whole didn't really come into fashion until we started to live differently. So that's another kind of facet of the Victorian era. We see this big change in culture. And a major factor in that change is that people stopped living so much in the communities with their families, but they would then travel to where the industrial age had begun. And in order to maybe change your station in life or to make money to send back to your family, people would move to these metro areas to live differently. So they were living in communal housing sometimes, you had apartment buildings, and all of those kind of things start to crop up. That also brought with it its unique challenge, where previously graveyards, so to speak, just to do that differentiation there, I would say the graveyards you see most often would be either a part of a church, so either within the church's boundaries, or even small family cemeteries. There are a number of small family cemeteries all over the city of Atlanta. You would be very, very shocked to find where some of them are. There's some of the two most notable ones that I encourage you all to look for and do a little more of your own research, is that there is a cemetery located on the property of the Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. There is also a cemetery, a very small cemetery that's located on 75 South. If you have gone, I think it's just a few exits past the city, If you would maybe even never notice, but you have in between the interstate and the off ramp for that exit, you have another small cemetery there. And so you kind of see the issue of why maybe having these small cemeteries all over the place could present a problem. So they essentially decided that the city needed to set aside a place for for people to be buried. And so when Oakland began, it served not only for burials for family members, and that kind of traditional term interment, but also to be a final resting place for the indigent and unknown. There's a lot of different terms for it, but Oakland Cemetery actually has 2 Potter's Fields. The most notable is the large kind of expanse that runs essentially from our greenhouse almost over to Boulevard. And that area has about 8,000, I think my math might be right on that, residents. And it's really interesting, something about that is because typically with a Potter's Field, it would a lot of times be burials that were, like I said, for unknown people who had passed away, and the city government would have to find a way to, do a service for those folks. But we actually did Georgia State students did some work in the 1970s to get a little bit of a better understanding of the essentially what's under the ground, and they found that there was all types of different types of coffins. So you would typically, with a Potter's Field, you would have essentially a contractor who would then be the casket maker officially for the city, and they would make the standard kind of pine boxes. But when they did the survey, they actually found that there was some different types of materials used, which gave us the indication that maybe not all of the people who were buried there were necessarily unknown burials, but some of them may have been people who just wanted to be buried in Oakland but had missed out on the opportunity to purchase that land. So that whole of all of our many tens of thousands of residents, we have so many interesting stories. And so a big part of what we do is try to share those stories. And when I say we, I refer to the organization that I work for and that our lovely residents you'll meet in a little while later this evening volunteered for, but it's the Historic Oakland Foundation. So as I mentioned before, Oakland being a city park, and also that idea that the families could, tend to and care for their own family lots, that led to a very unique kind of issue for Oakland, which is that there was no endowment. So most cemeteries, essentially, when you purchase land for burial for a family plot, if you've ever gone through that process yourself, you notice that there is, you pay into an endowment, and that money would be set aside for the future care of and upkeep of the grounds and of the cemetery, and of the monuments, pretty much all aspects of the cemetery. But because Oakland had such a young beginning, we had that early kind of rush of people purchasing the land. There was this conception that families would essentially forever come and tend to and visit and spend time with their lost loved ones. But as we now understand, that's not necessarily the case. You have, through a lot of different factors, you have, of course, maybe generations die off or different kind of factors, families move away, but that fell out of fashion. But essentially, the land ownership of those lots continued on through generations of their family. There's essentially descendants who have inherited this land, and at times may not even be aware that they're owners of a piece of property within the cemetery. But that kind of, went by the wayside. And Oakland, over the years, after we kind of saw our, once we ceased to be the main municipal cemetery, once Westview was opened, which Westview is a significantly larger cemetery than us, and again, has a sort of different style. It's in the more modern style, both of, funerary practice as well as the funerary monument. But once they kind of took things over, you saw a decline in interest in Oakland, essentially. And through the years, Oakland sadly kind of deteriorated. And by the 1970s, it was in really very poor shape. And there was a group of lovely, concerned, motivated people made up of both descendants, but also people just interested in historic preservation and other aspects associated with that. They got together to organize and form the Historic Oakland Foundation. And what the foundation is essentially a park conservancy group, or a Friends of the Cemetery group. But what we do is help to raise the funds and do the restoration work to hopefully restore the cemetery and repair it over time. And it's as I said, it started in 1976 when we were placed on the National Register of Historic Places, that work began in earnest. But it didn't really catch on until, I would say, within the last 20 years. There's been significant progress with our ability to both share Oakland with the public and to restore what time and weather and all other factors of just being out in the in the weather can do to sculptures and all of those things. So they do that restoration, but we refer to it often as preservation. Because with historic preservation, the idea is not to necessarily make things look brand new, but we want to maintain the original integrity of the art, of the essentially hardscape, is how we like to refer to it, which is the walls and different facets of those family lots. And so I'm going through our mission. I'm trying to lead you through what our mission is, which is to preserve, enhance, restore, and share Oakland. So that preservation is kind of what I'm talking about. And then we want to enhance it because, of course, we always want to build on the foundation that was laid ahead of us, of this beautiful, sprawling place that people can come and enjoy, both as a public park, but also as a place of reverence, or if you to come and visit lost loved ones. So we carry on that tradition that the Victorians essentially started, and we kind of try to build from there. And so through telling stories, that's one of the biggest ways that we can really share. And we're really very fortunate. One of the original founders of the Historic Oakland Foundation was a man named Franklin Miller Garrett, who's actually an Oakland resident. But he was a historian, and he is Atlanta's, I think he has the distinction of being the only official historian for the city of Atlanta. He published, his most famous work is Atlanta and Environs, which is a massive kind of compendium history of the city of Atlanta, and it's fascinating to read. But one of his earlier works it seems like a personal project he was really motivated in, which was publishing what he named Garrett's Necrology, where he would travel to cemeteries around the Metro Atlanta area. And this was in the 1920s and 30s, he was doing this research. And he essentially recorded all information available for these cemeteries. Essentially, if you're familiar with Find a Grave, it's a lot like that, but there wasn't really necessarily a groundswell movement of people trying to catalog these things. This was just a man with I believe he rode his bicycle to do this, but he published this, and we build on that in terms of our ability to know both who our residents are and hopefully to know a little bit more about them, more than them just being a name or birth date. And so so that is how we kind of have that information that we share. And in our sharing, we do things such as the capturing the spirit of Oakland, which is typically our way to acknowledge the Halloween season. And what in capturing the spirit of Oakland, our residents come to visit us. And we'll be seeing some of those residents a little later in this evening. And I know I could talk about Oakland forever and ever and ever.
Rudy, it's all been really great information. It's amazing to hear about the work that the cemetery is doing, especially in steps of preservation. And I know we are super excited to meet some of our residents. Before we go to the residents, I believe that we actually have a local author who is going to be speaking next on some more insight into the cemetery itself. So we would love to do that, and then we'll find out all about our residents next.
Yeah, excellent. So I know we have Amy Bonesteel Smith and Bill Smith here to talk. Amy's going to do a little bit more of an introduction, but they are descendants, and they will share their story with you to help us kind of transition. So I'll throw it over to you, Amy and Bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Rudy. Awesome. I am thrilled to be here with Bill, my husband. Thanks to the Metro Atlanta Chapter of the Women's Book Association. I've loved partnering with you and being a member. It's been amazing so far. A little bit about me. I'm a local freelance writer. I've been writing for Atlanta Magazine and Georgia Trend and Creative Loafing and pretty much anything you've picked up. I've written for actually every publication in Atlanta, and I've been around a long time. One little history thing that I did was this book about the Cathedral of the Christ the King. So I helped them do their history, probably about 7 or 8 years ago. But I'm here to introduce Bill, and this is Bill's book, Villa Claire. He is a 5th generation Atlantan. We're parents to 3 6th-generation Atlantans on his dad's side, on his parents' side. He also does professional communications. He's worked for Coca-Cola, UPS. He writes speeches, but we are passionate about history and we love Atlanta history. And he's going to tell you a little bit about the Rawsons, who are part of his family. So I will turn this over to Bill.
Thank you, Amy. Very nice introduction. Hi, everybody. Amy's told me about your group and your Zoom chats, and I know she enjoys it, and now I know why. It's been a fun event. So I'm going to talk about the story of the Rawsons at Oakland, which is a tale of 2 brothers. And if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of look at my notes while I tell the story. Later on, you'll get to actually meet some of the residents at Oakland, but I'm going to tell you about some of my ancestors that are there now. E.E. and William Rawson, both are pioneers of Atlanta and lifelong rivals. And they were both stubborn and ambitious men on different sides, opposite sides of the war between the states. And they had very different views on the burning issues of the day, but they came together in the end. So let's start with William Allen Rawson. He's the older sibling, born in 1810. And when you walk into Oakland Cemetery for the main entrance, you cannot miss his mausoleum. It's an imposing granite tomb that looks like a small Masonic temple. And it's that way because he was a Mason. It features a beautiful stained glass dove inside, and It's a creepy crypt that adds a lot to Oakland's spooky Gothic ambiance. The Rawson boys were from the quaint village of Craftsbury, Vermont. And there, young William Rawson, as a teenager, fell in love with a beautiful woman named Julia Root. But he needed money to win her hand. This was in the 1840s, and Southwest Georgia was the land of opportunity. The area had been recently cleared of Creek Indians, and the cotton rush was on. So William Rawson went there to seek his fortune, William A. Rawson. He hopped on a stagecoach to New York, took a schooner to Port St. Joe, Florida. Then he traveled by rail to Westville, Georgia, where he opened up a dry goods store in partnership with his in-laws. They were the Root family. Now, in those days, a dry goods store was like Amazon. You could buy most anything. Often it was on credit. You could get sacks of corn, you could get hardware, you could buy guns, candles, even coffins, as my ancestors were in the business of selling those, and it was a good business back then. So by the time he was 40, W.A. Rawson became wealthy, but he was not happy. He lacked what he wanted most, which was a big family. And there's a quote from him, I thought it was poignant. I'll just briefly read it. God in his wisdom has humbled and chastened me. When I started in life full of energy and determination to be rich and honorable and to hold on an advanced position in society, I looked forward to the time when my sons and daughters would cluster around me. Sadly, this was the dream of my youth, but it was only a dream. So after 15 years of marriage, William and Julia were finally blessed with a beautiful daughter. Her name was Susan Julia Collier, now an Oakland resident. But her father was always disappointed without a son. And so I wonder if building a giant mausoleum in Oakland was his way to carry on the name without a male heir. During the Civil War, W.A. Rawson was on the wrong side. He funded a band of Confederate cavalry named Rawson's Raiders. He and his brother-in-law, Sidney Root, built and lost a fleet of Union blockade runners. They operated out of Apalachicola and tried to import smuggled goods into Georgia, and they were eventually busted. Shortly after the war, his plantations were destroyed, and his beloved wife, Julia Root Rawson, she died. He wrote in his diary, "I felt stunned by the blow at first, but soon awoke to the bitter reality, and it seems as though my heart must break. I can scarcely write for the tears blinding me. I feel desolate and broken up completely. I feel hedged in and cannot see any light ahead." So what did he do after this sad departure? He immediately married a younger woman, and she too is buried in Oakland with next to his first wife, Julia. Her name's Florida, and she's in there with W.A. Rawson. After the war, he wrote a letter to the United States President, Andrew Johnson, asking for clemency, and this was promptly granted. Johnson was very lenient with providing clemency for Southerners, and this was actually controversial, and it ended up to him being impeached. But W.A. Rawson got his clemency, regained his citizenship, and the letter from Johnson is now in the History Center. The other half of the story is E.E. Rawson, Edward Elijah Rawson, the younger brother, born in 1818. E.E. also happens to be my great-great-grandfather. So he's my true ancestor and the good guy in the story, really. After the death of their family, of the father in Vermont, young Edward Elijah moved to Georgia in 1838. Right away, he set up a dry goods store that competed against his big brother's business. And so William was there watching. He was kind of miffed watching his younger brother set up an even more successful business and starting a large family right in his backyard. So they didn't really, I got the sense that they didn't really get along at this time. And then after he made his decent living, young E.E. Rawson moved from Westville to Atlanta, where he saw the future. He recognized that the potential of Atlanta as a railroad junction, kind of a rowdy place, but he could see the potential of the big. It was actually then a smaller city, but he saw the future there. He moved his family and dry goods business to downtown Atlanta, and he built a large house called the Terraces. You can find it near the old Turner Field on Rawson Street, downtown Atlanta. During the war, E.E. Rawson kept close ties with his many friends up north. Most likely, he was part of an espionage ring of Union supporters in Atlanta. These secret Yankees helped slaves escape to freedom on the Underground Railroad. They helped Union soldiers avoid capture, feeding them when they were lost and trying to find their way back. Often they were escaping from Andersonville. These Yankees helped, Rawson family helped the escaped soldiers, and they provided invaluable intelligence to Sherman's army on Atlanta's defenses in the movement of Confederate forces. E.E. Rawson was very happy to see the Stars and Stripes return to Atlanta with Sherman's conquering army. As a member of the city council, he led a small group of officials who surrendered Atlanta. These guys got together one morning, taking a white flag along Marietta Street through the bombed out neighborhoods, and then eventually ran into Henry Slocum of New York, and they gave him the keys to the city. The Union Army set up camp at E.E. Rawson's house right away. He tried to negotiate a peaceful occupation, but that effort failed. Sherman ordered everyone in Atlanta, including E.E. Rawson and his family of 7, to leave their homes. They boarded a northbound train on the way out of town, and as they did so, they saw a vast cloud of black smoke on the horizon while they looked homeward on their journey into exile. E.E.'s son, Mary Rawson, was a teenager, and she described this scene. E.E.'s daughter was a teenager. She described this scene, and it was a very compelling description of the burning of Atlanta. After the Civil War, E.E. returned to Atlanta and became more prosperous than ever. He made loads of money during the Reconstruction by starting the Gate City Coffin Company. Many of the caskets in the ground at Oakland Cemetery were sold by my great-grandfather. While he rebuilt his business, he led efforts to move Georgia's capital from Milledgeville and build at the Gold Dome State Capitol that we know now. He also helped establish the Atlanta Water Board and the Atlanta School Board. Eventually, E. and William Rawson were reunited in Atlanta. They invested in real estate together and set aside their differences. William died in 1879, during a trip to Iowa. He was visiting his cousin, Charles Rawson, to treat a nagging blood illness. They later figured out that this was diabetes. They didn't know how to treat it. So he passed away in Iowa, was brought back to Atlanta, put into the mausoleum in 1880 when it was erected. And there are a lot of prominent people there. You'll hear more about some of them later tonight. His daughter is an interesting person. She married an attorney named Charles Collier, who became mayor of Atlanta and president of the Cotton States Exposition in the 1880s. All of them are in the crypt now. You'll hear more about their stories later. And next to him, nearby, is E.E. Rawson, who left a bigger imprint on the city of Atlanta, but his grave is much more modest. He died in 1893, and he and his wife Elizabeth had 9 children. And they're all at Oakland Cemetery, along with a total of 16 descendants, including grandchildren, where they live now, surrounded forever by the city they helped build and rise from the ashes. So that's the story.
Bill, thank you so much. It's so amazing to hear how Atlanta's deep roots currently reside in Oakland and how the city itself has evolved. Thank you so much. It's been really
Yeah.
great. I know, Rudy, you have a few other people that you're going to introduce that will share even more of Oakland's rich history.
All right, so this is the exciting part. We talked about history and all of the kind of more dry aspects of things, but it's my pleasure to share with you the opportunity to meet some of our residents at Oakland and let them tell their own stories. Each year we do Capturing the Spirit of Oakland, where we select a number of our residents to talk about themselves, and they are of all status and strata of life. But the folks you'll be meeting this evening are Julia Collier Harris, who is actually a descendant, as Bill just mentioned, as well as Sarah and Marion Kaiser, Julia Bowers, and finally our most famous resident, Margaret Mitchell. So without further ado, I would love to hand it over to Miss Julia Collier Harris.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Julia Collier Harris, and I was destined to make a difference in this world through my writing and my activism. I was born in 1875 to a family of wealth and prestige, as you just heard. And I used my privilege to fight for social change in the South and beyond. I was born in 1875, as I mentioned, and I was the eldest of 7 children. Our father, Charles Collier, was a member of the founding families of Atlanta, and he also served as mayor, as Mr. Bill just mentioned. Now, my mother, the lovely Susie Rawson, she believed that I should be educated like so many other young women of a certain class. She had a plan for my life that included finishing school in Boston, followed by my society debut here in Atlanta. Finishing school always amused me, darn near finished me. You see, I always dreamed of a life more intellectual and bohemian, surrounded by artists and progressive thinkers. Well, those destinies didn't quite turn out as I expected. You see, I got married in 1897 to Julian Collier, son of Julian Harris. Lordy, I've been in the ground a little bit too long. So Julian and I had a lovely partnership. It was much more than a partnership in life. We were also partners in business, and we were partners in the fight for social change. Now, Julian wrote for the Atlanta Journal newspaper. Eventually, I started writing articles for them as well. We had 2 sons, but both my beautiful boys passed very young and only months apart. Afterwards, I was in a dark, dark place, but I used that time to propel my writing career because I had to work to survive that. So when Julian and his father started a brand new magazine dedicated to political and social reform, I threw myself into those subjects. Then in 1913, Julian got a job with the New York Herald, and we were posted to the Paris office. Now, Paris was filled with writers and artists like Picasso and Matisse. Soon I began writing articles about art and culture, in-depth features on the subject, despite the fact that my passport listed my education and my occupation as housework. I wrote my first book, and it was a success. But as World War I heated up, Julian and I left Paris. But by 1919, we were back in France, and when the Treaty of Versailles was signed, yours truly was one of only 2 women journalists in attendance. By 1920, we returned home to Georgia, and we purchased the Columbus Inquirer-Sun newspaper. Now, I was vice president of the company, and I penned hundreds of bold editorials. I used my platform as a bullhorn to tackle ignorance and injustice and corruption head on. I attended the Scopes monkey trials in Tennessee, and my editorial campaign was instrumental in defeating some anti-evolution legislation back here in Georgia. Julian and I were also in favor of education reform at a time when Georgia ranked highest in the nation for illiteracy. But it was my views on racism that caused the most controversy. I was a staunch advocate for equality, and my vehement condemnation of the Ku Klux Klan and their murderous reign of racial terror resulted in some death threats for me and my family. My husband and I even had to leave the state temporarily for our security, but we were still openly denouncing the Klan and the inequities between our white and Black citizens of Georgia. And in 1926, we were awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Meritorious Public Service. Ours was only the second newspaper in the South to earn a Pulitzer, and the very first one for Georgia. Now, as was the custom of the time, my husband had to accept the award on our behalf, but here's what Julian said. My wife, Julia Collier, is as fearless as she is intelligent, unyielding in the face of injustice of any kind, and a constant inspiration. Now, winning a Pulitzer was a great honor, and it further fueled my activism. At the 1930 Conference of Southern White Women, we took a strong stand against lynching. We resolved that it is not only the crime of ignorant and irresponsible mobs, but that every citizen who condones it, even by his silence, must accept a share of its guilt. And we called upon all right-thinking men and women to do their utmost for the complete eradication of that heinous crime. Now, I look back on it today and I see that my life and my work did have more meaning than what I envisioned as a young girl. I had made a difference, and I stuck to my beliefs. Now, later in life, I mentored other young journalists, and I encouraged them to follow their hearts and minds with courage and integrity. Last year, I was inducted into the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame at the University of Georgia. I'm also a member of the Georgia Journalists Hall of Fame, and I was named a Georgia Woman of Achievement. Not bad for a girl who was taught how to use the right fork and keep her opinions to herself. Obviously, I missed that class. Now, at age 91, I came here to Oakland. Imagine living from 1875 to 1967. I was there when women won the right to vote. I wrote my way through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the Jim Crow South. And I lived long enough to see the Civil Rights Act signed into law. Now it's up to you, my friends, to carry on my legacy. Fight for what is right and just in our beloved country. So I'll leave you with this. Go forth, do good in this world, and be well.
Well, thank you so much, Julia. I feel like you have certainly earned your rest. So we will allow you the rest of your evening and beyond. And I see that there's a Sarah behind you that might want to say a word or two. Again, thank you so much, Julia.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Sarah Turner Ivy Kaiser. I'll introduce my husband.
Good evening. My name is Marion Columbus Kaiser. I was born in 1830 and passed, and I'm interred at Oakland Cemetery. In our mausoleum in 1893, I'm buried with 3 wives and a husband. We call that a tease.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about how that happened. Obviously, Mary and I we were not married. We were married before. So I am the 3rd wife, Mr. Kaiser here.
Yes.
He had 2 wives prior to me, Miss Sarah Octavia and also Miss Hessie Smith. Miss Sarah Octavia unfortunately passed in childbirth at the age of 35. And then Mr. Marion married Miss Hessie, and she unfortunately passed away also at the age of 35, but not in childbirth, but she did pass young. She passed in 1890, and that's when we married. We married in 1890. And I followed Marion into the afterlife, into our vault in 1897. But Marion's going to tell you a little bit what happened with that.
Sure. As I mentioned, I was born in 1830, and I ended up opening a dry goods business in Atlanta with my brother, John, who's my older brother. And our dry goods business, mostly we specialized in shoes. Maybe that's why I had 3 wives. I don't know. But
Or he was rich because of people like shoes.
yes, people
Just
did like their
saying.
shoes. So as the business prospered, I did make the plans and built one of the first mausoleums in Oakland Cemetery. If you stop by and see it sometime, it's very beautiful.
It's a beautiful one, and the first one in Oakland, and it's just gorgeous.
And as Miss Rudy had mentioned earlier, back in the day when Oakland was first started, it was a social event to come in on the weekends, attend your graves of your family members, and that's what I was doing. I had my 2 wives that were there, and the weekends came, and I would notice Miss Sarah tending to her husband Michael's grave, and wouldn't you know it, they also said that there's more weddings and funerals at Oakland now. Well, our love started in a courtship that began right there at Oakland Cemetery.
It did. See, I had, as I said, I was married before. I married a gentleman by the name of Mr. Michael James Ivy. He actually is his family was a pioneer. They were the first family to settle in the town of Atlanta. Actually, it was Terminus, and then it became Atlanta. But they had the first farm, 200 acres, right at Peachtree and Baker area, right where the Marriott Marquis is today, I'm told. So his mother and father, Hardy and Sarah Todd Ivy, had the farm. They had 10 children, never owned a slave, and they worked that land. And as Atlanta grew up around their farm, their children became, my husband was an attorney for the city of Atlanta, so they became part of the fabric of Atlanta. Unfortunately, he passed away when he was 60, and he was buried at Oakland, and I was tending to his grave when Marion caught my eye.
Yep. Michael actually and I did business together as he was an attorney, so I was familiar with Michael and with Miss Sarah, and in the proceedings there we ended up meeting again. And eventually I proposed marriage to Sarah. I said, I think we should get married. It's a perfect opportunity. And she turned me down flat.
I did. See, it was a custom at the time when you're married to be buried with your husband, but beside your husband. And I was married prior to Mr. Michael Ivy. And when I got married, I had to be buried next to Michael. And that was the custom. So, I took this to Marion and I said, I love you, but I can't marry you. What can we do about this?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I did have the wealthiest estate in Fulton County when I passed. And so we just dug up Michael and he joined us in the mausoleum, and we're all together as one big happy family. If those walls could talk.
Yeah. So there's 3 wives and 2 husbands in that mausoleum. I believe you call that a reality TV show now. I'm pretty sure. But as I said before, just a little bit about the Ivies. They were, like I said, the pioneering family. They had a 200-acre farm right where the Marriott Marquis is today. In fact, if you go to right at Peachtree and Baker Street, there's a small little park with a statue of a man in it, and that man is Hardy Ivy. Now, unfortunately, Hardy Ivy, he passed away at an early age of 60. He fell off his horse and broke his neck. And so there's many, how would you say, stories about where he's actually buried. Is he buried in the Decatur Cemetery? Is he buried at the Turner Family Cemetery? Or is he buried at Oakland? And so it's all conjecture at this point, but I'm here to tell you that he's buried right by our cabin. He had Sarah and Hardy built a double log cabin right there on that farm. And when he passed away, he was buried right next to his cabin. And so he is actually underneath the Marriott Marquis right now. Now, Michael grew up, as I said, he became an attorney and we married, and things went well. And unfortunately, he passed away. And then I met my sweetheart here. And I mean, it was love. It was love at first sight. And it was funny how our love story started at Oakland. When a lot of love stories end at Oakland, ours started. And so
I was also into real estate for a little bit too, and we did have a couple of buildings. The first building I built was the Kaiser building, which was a law office, and
yes,
that's another reason. So I think we were destined to meet up at one time. And then later on, built the Kaiser Marriott Hotel, and that came down in 1951. The law offices came down in 1936. So as far as the physical buildings being left over from our legacy, the only one we have now is our mausoleum.
Mausoleum, which is a beautiful mausoleum.
Please come by and visit us.
Now, Marion also had 4 children.
Yes.
Excuse me, 5 children. I apologize. And
One
2
died.
passed away.
Okay.
2 little ones passed away. But one died at the early age, at the age of 18. Marion, why don't you tell them what happened?
Yeah, my son Eddie was off at college and he died of
At
Georgetown. Yes, he was in Georgetown and he had what's the pneumonia?
Typhoid
pneumonia. And Eddie started to get sick. We brought him home, and he was my pride and joy. And if you stop by, you will see his memorial monument outside the mausoleum. But that was very hard. I almost lost my life then when Eddie died. I was so saddened. Eventually, he succumbed to the disease at home, and we built that memorial for him outside. If you want to stop by and see it sometime, we can tell you all about the symbolism that's in that memorial. There's, I think, 6 different types of symbolism there.
Marion took that very, very hard, but we got him through it.
Yep.
And you know, at the end, he went into business after the war with his brother, John Franklin.
Yes.
And then John Franklin passed away, and it was MC and JF Kaiser Company. And then when John Franklin passed away, it became MC Kaiser Company. And then when Marion passed away, as he said, it was the largest estate that was actually registered in Fulton County. He had a dry goods business and also sold wholesale shoes. And then the business was passed along to his eldest son, William Howe.
Yeah. Also, my business partner, John F., is outside the mausoleum. When you stop by, you will see a very large, another monument.
An obelisk.
Yes, an obelisk with an angel pointing up. And that is a monument we put up to John F. too, is when he passed. I believe that was in 1891.
Yes, yes.
Or I'm sorry, it was 1882.
Sorry. Well, in fact, Marion's youngest son is named after John Franklin.
That's right.
So he had a baby the year that John Franklin passed away, and his son is named John Franklin also. Now, we still have descendants. Our descendants are still around. In fact, our great-granddaughter was a member of the board at Oakland Cemetery. And it wasn't only but a few years ago that Marion was walking around our granddaughter, Josephine.
We were out doing a tour, and we met.
And we met her.
Yeah.
We happened to be out on a Halloween tour and introducing ourselves to some nice people, and there she was. So we walked around with her. So.
Well, look at the time, dear. I think it's about time to let our friends go on to meet another one of our residents. But we want to thank you all for coming by to see us.
Thank you.
And if you want to come by and see the Love Stories tour at Historic Oakland Cemetery, we are one of the featured stories there as well. And I think there might be another love story feature coming up here. One of our residents that also joins us on that tour. Thanks again for coming out to see us.
Thank you, sir.
Well, we are so excited to meet our next speaker. I know that there's another Julia, not the same one we met before, but a new Julia who has an exciting story to tell as well.
Well, how y'all doing? My name is Julia Lucky Zachary Bowers, and my husband Teet and I, we are some of the most famous residents of Oakland, but not for the reasons that you probably are thinking. Now, I was born in 1910. My parents, they were the Zacharys, bless his heart. My daddy came from North Carolina. He was a school teacher. He came to teach school, and he met my mama, and he got married to her because they were in love. And then they had my sister Geneva and me. Please remember that Geneva is the older sister because I have to remind her of that several times. Well, Daddy passed when I was 9. But you know, I went on to the public school, and who did I meet but Alton DeMar? We called him Teet Bowers. Don't ask why, his name is just Teet. Well, he was my elementary school sweetheart. So I know y'all can believe I had an elementary school sweetheart. I should tell you that my mama did not care for Teet Bowers. Well, I didn't let that stand in my way. Teet and I, we kept seeing each other. And as a matter of fact, we're sweethearts all during school. You know, I thought he looked like Clark Gable. But Mama and Geneva said he looked like Moe from the Three Stooges. Well, Teet left school in 11th grade. And you know, that did not endear him to my mama any more than usual. And I went on, I finished school, and Teet became a mechanic, which is a good job. And after a couple of years, I married Teet Bowers. Now, do not believe at any time that I was able to stay at home and be a housewife because I was a working woman. I went to work for Norris Candy Company. Now, y'all may know about Norris Candy Company. Norris Candy Company is right up there near Davidson's on Peachtree Street. Y'all know where that is? I started out there in 1935 as a stenographer. That's right, in an age where women didn't generally work outside the home. I had a job. Y'all are welcome. Well, I should tell you, by the time I left, I was a vice president at Norris Candy Company, and I will always, always be grateful to the Norrises because they did have a great deal of faith in a little girl without a college education. Well, Pete and I, we married, of course, and we had a good life. Now, our one sorrow was we never did have children. But my sister Geneva got married, and she had 2 girls. And you know what? We loved those girls just like they were our own. They used to go for rides in our convertible Cadillac. And every Christmas, I put up a pink Christmas tree. They loved that pink tree. You know, all in all, Teet and I had a really good life. We had a lot of good friends. We played gin rummy every Friday. And may I just say, we might have had a good deal of gin. Cheers. Well, you would think everything was hunky-dory. Well, I passed at the very young age of 56 of liver cancer. Well, I was buried in Oakland. And of course, Mama and Geneva, they thought, well, we're rid of Teet forever. And you know, just like a man marrying Kaiser, he ran off and he got married again. And he was married for another 13 years. In the interim, since Mama thought she was good and rid of Teet, she wanted to make sure. So she took one of Geneva's girls, Jane, down to Oakland and she put all the plots in Jane's name because she said, I do not want to spend eternity next to that man. Y'all know how that might have turned out. Well, Teet passes 13 years later, and sure enough, what happens? His second wife, who was a good woman, brought him to Oakland and buried him next to me, right where he belongs, at least in my opinion. Well, nobody knew about it. Of course, there he was. And one day Jane comes down and she's visiting. And here's me, here's Mama, here's Daddy, and there's T. Well, she runs home and she tells her mama. She says, oh, Mama. She said, Uncle Teet has done passed and he's buried down there at Oakland, right next to Aunt Julia. We got to get him dug up. Granny must be spinning in her grave. Now, I didn't tell you before, but Geneva, bless her heart, is the sweetest, sweetest soul ever. And she's one of the people that helped make us famous. Oh, I'm going to tell you why, but she helped make us famous so that we are Oakland's couple. She looked at Jane and she said, oh, Jane, don't do that. He was a fool, but Julia loved him. Now, you want to know why we're Oakland's most famous couple? I will tell you. My epitaph reads, she burned the candle at both ends, but it made a lovely light. Y'all don't know me well enough, but I think that's very appropriate. And Teets, bless his heart, said, thank you, Geneva, says, he was a fool, but Julia loved him. Our epitaphs make us the most famous couple there at Oakland. I hope y'all have a lovely night. Enjoy yourselves and cheers. Good evening.
Well, thank you so much, Julia. That was fantastic. Next, we have one last resident of Oakland. You might have heard of her. She has a few landmarks around the city. But if you're not Atlanta local, you may not know Margaret Mitchell as well. So we're excited that she came back from the dead to speak to us.
Good evening, everyone. I am Margaret Mitchell, and you've heard a lot about Oakland tonight. It is a beautiful place. It's a garden cemetery. The idea is to make it as close to heaven as possible, and I believe they have done that. Now, I came to Oakland in August of 1949 at the young age of 48. But I had been there as a visitor for many, many years because I have so much family buried there on both sides of the family. And you might have heard of me. I am a writer too. And by the way, I am just humbled by the fact that I was asked to participate in the Women's National Book Association event here. It's very humbling. And I did write a book. I am a writer. You might have heard of it, Gone with the Wind. It came out in June of 1936. And in 1937, the National Book Club chose it for their April selection. And then it actually won a Pulitzer Prize that same year. Now, that was in spite of the fact that many critics said it could not possibly be literature because it was too popular. But it did, and my life was changed forever, unfortunately, because I was a very private person when I was alive. Fortunately, it doesn't bother me to talk to strangers anymore, but after my book came out, I had one book signing and 2 public speaking events. And I was just a bundle of nerves for all 3 of those events. And so after that, I politely declined any further invitations to speak, although I did relent and attended the 1939 premiere of the movie Gone with the Wind. That was in Atlanta in December, and it was very exciting. I'm told it was the most excitement since the Cotton States Exposition in 1895. But meeting Clark Gable was memorable. I'm going to leave it at that. Now, I started writing my book in 1926 at my husband's suggestion, John. Now, I now dedicated the book to John. And John was actually my second husband, which might sound a little scandalous. And he was also the best man at my first wedding. I just like to get that out, and move on. But John suggested I write a book because I was at home convalescing. I had to resign my job as a reporter with the Atlanta Journal because I had an ankle injury that just refused to heal, mainly because I wouldn't stay off of it. And finally, the doctor said, Peggy, you have got to stay off your feet. So I did, and John would bring me books from the library. And then one day he came home with this old used typewriter and a big stack of paper and said, you need to write a book because you have read every book in the Atlanta Public Library. Of course, he didn't mean the hard science books or anything like that. But so I started writing, and it took me about 10 years. I would put it down and pick it up and hide it all over places, all over the apartment. And I never intended to publish it or submit it for publication. But of course, we know that changed, and the rest is history. But I did dedicate the book to John, and I chose the Civil War because as a young girl growing up, that's all any of those grown-ups talked about. Both my grandfathers were veterans. They fought for the Confederacy. And my grandmother, Annie Fitzgerald Stevens, my maternal grandmother, she was actually a young bride during the Civil War. She had a big house in Atlanta. It was used as a hospital for all those soldiers that came on the trains that had been wounded in battle. She stayed there the whole time until General Sherman came and paid us a visit. And then he made all the civilians leave. And you could go north or you could go south, but you were leaving. And so my grandmother went to Macon with her 2 younger sisters and kind of stirred things up down there before she came back. Now, her house survived the war, but unfortunately we had a big fire in 1917, and her house, which was only one of the houses she owned, it was lost then. But as I said, that's all they talked about after the war. But they did not mention that the South had lost. That was one little detail they left out. But that's all anybody talked about. And so I had a lot of material to use. And my father was president of the Historical Society. So when my book did get accepted and they wanted to publish it, I had to make sure that everything in there was correct, because if it was not, my father was sure to find it. And in fact, during one interview, a reporter asked my father how many times had he read my book. And his reply was, I read it once. Please don't ask me to read it again. He was kind of a persnickety kind of guy. But I wrote the book. And then I only had 10 short years before I went to Oakland as a resident as opposed to a visitor. And I am the most popular resident there. I know those other people are important, but I have visitors from all over the world, and they leave the most interesting little items at my grave. And I know we're running out of time, but I did want to mention that I left all my personal effects to the Atlanta Public Library, the main central library right downtown. The address is #1 Margaret Mitchell Square. And on the 5th floor, they have the nicest display. They have my Pulitzer Prize certificate, my little book of the month paperweight, and a lot of family photographs, my Red Cross jacket. I was very involved with the Red Cross. And my reference library, my favorite portrait, and also my diploma from Smith College, where I actually left during my freshman year because my mother, who had wanted me to go to Smith because she wanted me to go to a Yankee college where I could get a man's education. Then she got sick and I came home and she died and I never went back. But do you know, after I won a Pulitzer, Smith College gave me a diploma and they invited me to their 20th reunion, which would have been my 20th reunion party. And of course I went. I'm always ready for a good party, like Julia. But that's, if you want to go to the library, you can see all those things and it doesn't cost anything. And I want to thank you again for asking me to participate. And please come and visit me. I am always there. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you to all the residents who came. We appreciate our very special exclusive Oakland Cemetery tour. The timing is perfect since it has been a very rainy Atlanta evening for those who are local. Those of you guys who aren't, don't worry, you guys got to stay dry no matter what. If you guys have any questions that you want to ask the residents or our Oakland expert, now's the time to drop them in the chat. We have been monitoring it. Otherwise, we will have to bid all of our guests a fond goodbye so they can go right back to their evening plans. While we're waiting to see if there are any questions, just a reminder, you can find out everything that's on Oakland's calendar, in-person and virtual events at their website, oaklandcemetery.com. And if you enjoy things that we've been organizing, you can follow us on Facebook, where we are planning to post our 2021 events. We do have our Book-A-Ween tour. So if you happen to have a great costume for maybe one of your favorite books, maybe you're a Harry Potter fan or a Good Omens fan, we are gonna do a virtual parade. And all of the information to find out about that is available on our Facebook page. We also have a suffrage-themed book club coming up in the first week of November. So if you're interested in that, again, check us out on Facebook and you'll see all of those events. I see a lot of congratulations and thanks in the chat. So for all of our residents, all of our speakers, and our Oakland expert, we appreciate your evening. We've had a great time with you. We hope that everybody gets a little Halloween spirit and goes and spends a pleasant and relaxing evening in the Oakland Cemetery. Thank you guys so much. And you can join us on Twitter for anything else. Thanks.
Rudy, did you have anything you wanted to add before we close out?
Sure. Just thank you to everyone. Really wonderful, lovely experience. Thank you to our residents for joining us this evening. If you're interested to hear more of these resident stories, since we cannot do CSO in person this year, we are doing a virtual CSO film. It's our first feature-length film for Oakland. You can purchase a pre-sale version of the film, but it will be out to the public this coming Thursday. So thank you so much, and please come to Oakland. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night and a happy Halloween next week.